opponent voted for Senate Bill 5. Now, if you had been a member of the Ohio House, would you have voted for it?
No, absolutely not. I think it was probably the single most, and there have been a number of extreme bills, but I think this was definitely the kind of the flagship as far as extremism coming from the latest General Assembly and administration. There's a budget crisis. Drastic steps have to be taken. This was less an example of fixing the budget than, frankly, more an example of trying to target Democratic constituency. This isn't going to solve any of our problems. There's no tangible benefit to the budget. If there are individual circumstances of misuse at times, of bad things that happen, then we should pay attention to those on an individual basis. We shouldn't try to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. That just shows a lack of effectiveness of bargaining on our end at the government. If we're not getting the right things, then we're not doing a good job bargaining. So we can't throw the whole thing off. Look, there's plenty of examples of misuse at times, which we can legislate individually. Unlike many Democrats, I have no problems with some specific things, such as double dipping. Personally, I think that is a problem. That's something that we can target. That's something that we can eliminate. That should be done on an individual basis. We shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and throw out collective bargaining essentially as a right. I disagree with that. And again, if we had more moderation and more of a sense of measure at the state level, it's something that we could have worked out without throwing the nukes, as the case may be.
And Ms. Baker, you have an opportunity if you'd like to address this as well.
Well, it was addressed to Mr. Meyer, but I want to make sure we set the record straight as far as the other question that was asked, and that was there was absolutely no voting on the proposal that the school funding was cut. That was just a proposal, understanding the process made by the governor. When it came to the House, then we have our deliberations on that budget. We do what we think is right. We give it to the Senate. They do their deliberation. If it has to go to conference committee, then both sides, represented by both sides, will work out the differences, and then it goes to the governor for a signature, and he can veto where he wants. But there was never a vote taken on the cuts. It was only a proposal, and a lot of conversations went from that point. And I know that's been said before, but there was never a vote. That's just the process of the governor having the first stab at trying to put a budget together, the House, the Senate, conference committee, and then back to the governor. Also, with the mayors, if I can still continue, there is a $45 million collaboration fund that we have, and I've been working with our mayors in trying to find ways, better ways, to save taxpayer dollars. And they have been extremely cooperative. They have the dispatch center already working at St. John Medical Center, which was something that they did together along with a few other mayors, even from Lorain County. But also they are working on the facilities, looking to see whether or not there is a way that we can collaborate and save more taxpayer dollars. So that is what's happening. It's a better way to manage government than to keep throwing money at government without an accountability piece. And they are embracing it. It's the way that we need to continue. And I am really thankful that this innovation fund is there for our cities to tap into.
And Ms. Baker, speaking of budgets, as Ohio's economy improves, would you favor restoring recent budget cuts?
That's a great question because, a year and a half ago, and that's all we're looking at, this was June of last year, and we're in September now of the following year, we had an $8 billion budget deficit. That's $1 billion, not $1 million. And now here we are, we have 120,000 new jobs. We are no longer a negative watch. We're the #1 job creator in the Midwest, and we have a $500 million uptick in revenue. Now that doesn't just happen. That happens because of the hard decisions and tough decisions that we've made at the Ohio House. What are we going to do with that $500 million? First of all, let's just reflect that we have it. And secondly, that's about 1.8% of our total budget. It's one little devastating problem. Medicaid, for example, if we have to be mandated by the federal government, that's a $900 million, as we estimate it now, mandate. We have $500 million, we're halfway there before we have to start cutting somewhere else. So I think it's too soon to really say what it is we should do with extra revenue coming in. But I think we need to reflect that we have the extra revenue and why we have it, and why we need to continue on the path that we're on to make sure that we continue to create an environment for jobs. Getting people back to work, not only do they become contributing members of our society, but they also get off the social services that is really hurting us right now. There's nothing better than a job, and a good paying job, and that is the focus and attention that we have at the Ohio House.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Thanks. Well, a couple of things with that. One, on the budget front, like I said, we need to look at the budget again. We need to stave off these budget cuts to the local municipalities, which will result in these backdoor taxes, them having to raise their taxes. Like I said, there are examples of wasteful spending that weren't looked at under the last budget. Things like the tax credit for donations to political office holders, things that don't do anything to relieve general people's tax burden, don't do anything to grow the economy, grow jobs, but do help political insiders, do help people raise money. Certainly, we have enough of that. Nobody moves to Ohio so that they can donate more money to a candidate. Now that costs the government a few million each year. That's not going to solve the budget crisis in itself. But there are insider-type things that we need to look at excising under the budget so that we don't make the sacrifices to more meaningful things like the local government fund that have been made under the most recent budget. Another thing, we talk about Ohio doing much better, and that's certainly the case, and I'm so happy for that. But I don't think the credit lies with the state government, where, under the latest budget, there's a lot of stopgaps, one-time money, selling off liquor licenses. It's not going to happen in the future, not going to be something that we can use in the long term. It's going to help us in the short term, not going to help us in the long term. So we need to look at making sure we do things properly. And under the most recent budget, that's just not going to cut it.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer, the Secretary of State was quoted in today's Plain Dealer as saying there are 12 forms of ID acceptable to vote in Ohio. He's also quoted as saying he believes the legislature will limit and reduce this number further after the election. If elected, would you support legislation that further limits voter ID?
That limits voter ID? No. There's no evidence of voter fraud. I mean, think about it. Just think about it from a logical perspective. If you're going to commit voter fraud, which is a felony, it's a federal offense, and you're not doing it by absentee provisions. So absentee is something else that, obviously, how are you going to identify people from an absentee ballot? That's not going to happen. We're talking about election day voter fraud. So you're going to go to a place where everybody knows you, and you're going to sign a name who potentially could have already been signed. The people see that person. And then you're going to lie and potentially find yourself convicted of a felony just to vote. There's no evidence of wide-scale voter fraud. It just doesn't happen. It's another example of extremism. It's another example of the Kasich administration pushing things to, frankly, target Democratic constituencies to help their own partisan interests. That's the problem, and it's not right.
Well, I think that if we're talking logical, this is a presidential year. This is a year where we in Ohio could be the state that makes the decision of what president is going to be elected. So if we think that there are those groups out there that are going to do all they can to manipulate the vote, then we're being very naive. There are groups out there that are working every day trying to figure that out. And the best thing that we can do for those who vote is make sure that the integrity of the vote is there. We want as many people voting as can possibly vote, but we only want them to vote once. And that is unbelievable. We would think that in this state, where we know the stakes are high and it's probably going to be a close race, that there aren't those groups trying to do what they can to manipulate that vote. So, I applaud Secretary of State Houston in trying to make sure that everyone has a fair chance at voting and that the candidates who are on that ballot can feel confident that who votes for them are those that wanted to vote for them. I do not have the confidence to say that things were just handled at the voting booth and don't worry about it and everyone's honest, and that's just, that is not the case here in Ohio. This is going to be a very contentious race, and especially at the presidential level, and we need to be very careful that everyone out there who votes feels confident that that vote counts.
Thank you. Start with you. Do you favor either privatizing the Ohio Turnpike, or could you also explain your stance on possible sale or lease of the Ohio Turnpike?
Yes, and as I said earlier, when we were balancing that $8 billion budget deficit, there wasn't anything that wasn't on the table. There were no sacred cows. Whether it's schools, whether it's cities, whether it's hospitals, nursing homes, and also Turnpike. Infrastructure right now is at a critical state that we need to figure out how we're going to make sure that our streets and roads and bridges are safe. We have about $1.6 billion over budgeted construction projects as it stands right now, and we need about another 10 billion projects to develop. So we have a need that is real, and we need to find real solutions. Now, having said that, I would rather find other solutions rather than leasing or selling the Turnpike. That is not something that I, at this point, support. I'm open-minded. We have not debated it. It has not come to the House. It hasn't even been in committee. This is the governor's proposal, and like I said, I'm open-minded to it, but we do need to consider that the streets, roads, bridges need to be safe, and they need to be taken care of. That is something that our taxpayers expect of their government. But we do have also issues that we are low in funding for that, and we need to find ways to take care of it. In talking to the Department of Transportation the other day, they have a lot of innovative ideas in trying to raise dollars. Whether the Turnpike Commission or the Department of Transportation is something that might be under one umbrella instead of two, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can look at it. But as it stands now, it has not been given to us in any kind of legislative proposal, and we have not debated it in committee, so it's really premature to say.
Thank you. And Mr. Meyer, your thoughts on privatizing, sale, or lease of the Turnpike?
I'll get to that in just a second. I do want to revisit the point from earlier, though, and since Nan did that for another point a little earlier, I'll feel okay about it. Basically, what Nan is suggesting is that groups are organized in a criminal conspiracy to commit voter fraud. These are felonies we're talking about. So for this to be a serious problem, for there to be groups conspiring about this, it's almost beyond the pale, because again, this is a felony. This is organized crime that Nan is describing. So if this is accurate, we've got much bigger problems than voter fraud. We've got really extreme actions going on, and that's not accurate. It's kind of conspiracy theory at its worst. As far as the Turnpike goes, look, this is one of the things that Kasich has been pushing. He's been pushing his privatization kick. And the fact is, it's just not there. That instead of real concrete jobs legislation, he's pushed Jobs Ohio. He's talking about creating leasing the turnpikes, creating private for-profit prisons, it just doesn't work. This has been done in other states. It's worked disastrously in Indiana as far as turnpikes go. As far as prisons go, it's had horrible corruption issues in Pennsylvania. Good Jobs First, a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center in Washington, D.C., concluded that privatization is often little more than a power grab by governors and politically connected business interests. The report said in 7 states that allow private entities to control their business recruitment function, problems have arisen, including misuse of taxpayer funds, excessive bonuses, and conflicts of interest in subsidy awards. Now, I think much of the, and I will have to continue the thought.
Thank you for your answer, and we'll start with you, Mr. Meyer. Do you support issue 2 on this year's ballot to reform how districts are drawn?
Yes, I do. It's not perfect, and there's certainly issues, and frankly, this is another example of where Democrats dropped the ball. We could have done a much better job of it when we were in power. We had the opportunity. We chose not to do. We were in power at the time, and we didn't do anything. And that's a failure of leadership on the Democratic side, and it's frankly something that I would have spoken up for at the time, and I speak up for now. It's not fair for any party to so completely gerrymander its districts as to have a Toledo congressperson representing where I live in Rocky River. That's just not good government. That's when partisanship, as I said, this toxic partisan environment, when it gets to that level, it's just not acceptable. We need a change. We need to vote yes on issue 2. It's not perfect. We should have done it better a few years ago, and it was a failing of Democratic leadership when we didn't do it. But certainly now's the time to rectify that.
Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Thank you, and I'm glad to hear that, we seem to talk about this at election time, but there was a 10-year time between the last time the census is out and today. So there was plenty of opportunity to change the way we do things, but it wasn't. And here we are faced now with an issue 2, which I do not support. I do not like taking the authority away from the voters who determine who it is that will be at those, who would be determining the district maps. But what I will say, though, is when we passed House Bill 369, there was also, which we all agreed upon, and it was, for the most part, a majority vote on both sides of the aisle, and that was to take a look at the redistricting reform task force. And they are meeting currently, and they are going to propose to us what it is that they would recommend changes in how it is that we draw our maps. And I think that is a better way. It is both Republican and Democrat on that force. It is actually comprised of 8 members of the General Assembly who are equally divided between the members of the 2 major political parties, and which is co-chaired by 2 members from each major political party. The task force is charged with issuing a report with recommendations for redistricting reform for consideration by the General Assembly. And the task force must hold a minimum of 3 public hearings, one of which is to be conducted after the task force issues its report, to allow for meaningful public discussion of the recommendation included in the report. The task force has been meeting, and I think that that is a much better way of handling this than the very partisan issue 2 that's on the ballot today. I would hope that there would be more publicity about what it is that both sides of the aisle, as I said, as a majority agreed to, and let that process move forward.
Thank you. The question is for both of you. This involves fracking, and if you're the incumbent, did you vote for allowing fracking in parks in Ohio, or if not, would you vote for fracking in parks in Ohio? Ms. Baker, I'll let you answer first, please.
All right, and I know that this is a very controversial issue. It has been not always presented in the correct way. There's a lot of the sky is falling mentality out there, and we really need to make sure, and this is a great opportunity to let those that are worried about whether or not the safety features of hydraulic fracking is being taken care of. There are 11 different things that has been passed that is in Senate Bill 315. You don't hear it talked about very much. It's unfortunate. But I'm just going to try to run through a couple of them, and then if there's any questions on the detail behind it, we certainly have that too. But it creates the nation's first combined well construction hydraulic fracturing chemical disclosure requirement. There's been a lot of talk about, you don't know what they're using. Yes, you do. You do know what they're using. It's posted. It's easy to find. It is part of this bill. It requires the sharing of all chemical information with doctors. There's been some rumors, oh my gosh, the doctors don't know what's going on. They do. Allows appeals to the Ohio Oil and Gas Commission for mandatory pooling, utilization, establishment of any exception. It requires well operators to take pre-drilling well water samples within 1,500 feet of a proposed horizontal well and disclose the results in permit applications. It requires well operators to disclose the source of water used with the well and drilling, fracturing. It encourages well operators to enter into a road use maintenance agreement. It draws upon the expertise of all state agencies. It increases liability insurance for horizontal wells and allows ODNR to better check and more closely monitor the activity. Now we can talk about the economic development piece of this, but we always seem to go to the safety, so I went there first. This is an economic game changer for Ohio, and we absolutely are fortunate to have this in our state, and that we are also fortunate to have the technology to do it safely. And there isn't one time that we haven't looked at every aspect to make sure that it is.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Well, a couple things, and first, I think the question was specifically, would you vote to allow it in state parks? I would certainly not allow it in state parks. Look, on hydraulic fracturing in general, this is coming one way or another. We need to make sure that it is done responsibly, though. It's not subjected to the same standards as the Safe Drinking Water Act. Whatever standards are in place right now, or have been in place, they're still insufficient. There has been data linking the earthquakes that Northeast Ohio has had to the use of hydraulic fracturing. We need to tread carefully here. This is coming one way or another. We need to do it right. We need to have the appropriate regulations in place. We need to make sure that the safeguards are in place. We need to make sure, look, we're in a budget crisis right now, and Ohio is one of the lowest severance taxes in the entire country. That's one area I will not allow. Certainly, I will not vote for myself for any tax hikes for people, for general voters such as me and such as you. This is one area where they need to pay their fair share. They need to pay that amount. This is coming. We need to make sure it's done right. We need to make sure they're paying their fair share. And we're talking about the economic growth in Ohio. A lot of that is from hydraulic fracturing, but the thing that's not being mentioned is a lot of that is out-of-state people being hired for short-term projects. They're coming in, they're renting some homes for a brief period of time while this lasts. This is going to, look, we've gone through boom and bust cycles for mineral extraction in the past. And when they bust, those cities that have them, those regions, they're left in a worse position afterwards. We need to make sure that we do our due diligence to make sure that they aren't left in a bad position. So that's what I want. I want to make sure that these standards are at an appropriate level, that the severance taxes are appropriate, then we can proceed.